Hey everybody, this is Shawn.
This is Braden.
This is a quick ad here before we start our show. Yes, we got to pay the bills too, and we're fortunate to have a couple sponsors. And and one of them is a T-shirt giveaway from the Guitar Repair Center. This guy's the best. I've been using him for a long time. So go to our Facebook page, the Psychology of Lickage Facebook page. Go share and like the T-shirt giveaway post. And we're going to be announcing that in a couple weeks. And what's the other thing? We got vintage and rare guitars that we're selling.
Yeah.
We become brokers now. Yeah. So what's the guitar of the week? What's the one this week?
So the guitar of the week this week is the Homer Haynes limited edition Stratocaster, built in 1988, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's a run of 300, and it's almost got like a gold color to it.
Oh yeah, it's just beautiful. It's modeled around the 57 Strat. They're very rare. It was one of the first Fender custom shop guitars built. So if you want to find out more, go to the Facebook post. You'll see a picture of it, or I think you'll put it up on Instagram as well, right?
It'll be on Instagram too.
Yeah, go check it out. And on with the show.
Hi, this is Shawn Meehan.
This is Braden Williams,
And you're listening to
The Psychology
of Lickage.
We are back.
Yes.
Can't
what
believe
episode
we
are
keep
we
going.
on?
What's going? What episode 8 or something? And the guests keep coming in.
I know.
And they keep talking longer and longer.
Awesome.
Hence, we have this is really cool. How often do you get a doctor on the show?
Yeah.
This is, and we're not talking. We're not talking. The heroes. I'm not saying he's not a hero. He's definitely our hero.
Yeah.
But we're not talking the medical doctors. This guy, he's so wicked. He's so educated. He's a doctor of music, man.
Exactly.
and so if you got an aching for music, he's the cure.
Yeah.
Okay, that's my bad dad joke of the day. But this guy is a fascinating character. He you and I have been. I think you turned him on to me, didn't you?
Yeah. To be honest, I can't remember how I found him. I think I found him just through Facebook, I think it was. And then I found him on Instagram, and I found his YouTube videos. And then I found out he was Australian because he started talking. And I was like, wow, he's from Australia.
Like, what a cool accent.
Yeah. Well, it sounded like he was from the South, the way he played.
Well,
right?
did he make you,
total.
totally. Yeah, he seemed like he was from Nashville. Did he make your Canadian accent feel hokey talking to him?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Every time I said about and out, it's just like, oh.
I must have said "eh" so many times. Hey, how's it going? Eh, that's great. Eh, you're great. Eh. No, but I think let's just cut to it. We're just so you guys know, this is a 2-part series. This was a very long conversation. He was very cool, very educational. Yeah. Man, I felt like I was getting a couple of free lessons here. It was just
squeezing
insane.
everything out of him.
Absolutely, we are big fans. I remember when you first joined the band, and we went through sort of a Danny Gatton phase for all we talked about.
What would
was
Danny do?
Gatton for about. Yeah, what would Danny do? We were gonna get T-shirts saying "What would Danny do?" And then I think Dr. Zane came up. We were like, "Oh man, you gotta check out this guy. He can do better than the Danny Gatton thing," which is a bold statement, I think. But
sure.
Anyways, let's just cut to it. This guy's a monster player, wonderful human being. This is part 1 of Dr. Zane. I want to start by let's talk about you. What's your history? Where do you come from? How old were you when you started playing guitar? And give us a little bit of your background.
Cool. Well, I was born in the late 80s, which was probably the zenith of the electric guitar in popular culture. And so I think that my exposure to the guitar was just, we had the MTV of Australia was a thing called Rage, which our government broadcaster runs. And every Saturday morning there would be film clips. And I just remember being a toddler and seeing Van Halen and Guns N' Roses, and like the guitar was just there. It was so present. And before I could even really verbalize it, just having this light bulb moment before I went to elementary school and just thinking that's the coolest thing in the world.
Yeah.
And my parents are musicians. My parents met at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music when they were studying, and they were teachers and they did gigs. So I did grow up in a house where there was music all the time and there were guitars and records and that. So I was very fortunate. And as soon as I showed an interest in that stuff, my parents were like, oh, okay. Oh, you want a guitar? And there was a guitar, and they had like this old beat up half size cowboy sort of guitar. They only had like 3 strings, but all I wanted to do was the sort of tennis racket in the mirror posing. You know, it was like familiar. 3 or something.
Yeah.
There's actually, I found a photo of it, you know, in a photo album the other day of me playing that guitar. And although I didn't actually play anything that was, you know, proper music on it, it was still like, I felt like I was playing along to the records, and it fostered that interest. And that kind of continued for a number of years. My parents put me on like piano to have some lessons. And while I wish I'd stuck with it because it'd be incredibly useful to be able to play piano, I just, being, you know, like 7 years old in 1991, I was like, it ain't about the piano, man. You know,
You're thinking
let's
about
be
Nirvana.
honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like my older brother's girlfriend gave me a cassette of Nevermind, and that was another big light bulb moment. I was just like, piano, you go back in your box, piano. And
Well,
so then like
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so they asked me if I wanted to have guitar lessons, and I was like, oh, yes. And I think it was like the first great decision I ever made in my life was saying, yes, I want guitar lessons. And that would have been, I was like, I think I just turned 9. I was about to turn 9.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up in Sydney, in the inner western suburbs of Sydney, which is kind of a bit like the Brooklyn of Sydney. It's sort of quite dense housing. It's still like inner city sort of vibe.
Mm-hmm.
And the area that I grew up in is called Balmain, which has a lot of pubs and bars. And throughout the 80s and the 90s, it had a really big blues scene.
Oh, wow.
And there was this well-known guitar teacher in the area, a guy called Mark Williams, who had taught lots and lots of people over about 30 years. And so I went and had lessons with him. And he was fantastic because he was a really funny guy. We got along really well. And he was really big on versatility. And I remember him saying to me that if you want to have any kind of career, you got to be versatile. You know, you got to be able to play blues. Like we started with blues. I think like in my first lesson, I learned a few chords in the blues scale, and he was very quick to get me on improvising. So for the first 2-3 years of playing guitar, I couldn't read a note. But then he was like, you know, it's time now, you know, to look at the golf clubs, as he called it. And, you know, and it was just super boring. Like learning to read music is not an interesting thing, but it is pretty useful.
Yeah.
And he would just sort of introduce me to different things, as would my parents. So I think what was really good about Mark and my parents is that they didn't force me to do anything. So they would go, you know, even with the piano, it was like, would you like to try this? And I think they could see after, you know, about 6 months, it wasn't for me. Mm-hmm. But if I showed any interest in anything, then they would very quickly follow it up with like, here's a record that's like that. I remember once in a lesson, Mark referring to bluegrass music. And I just found like the imagery of bluegrass, like, wow, what is that? And then he played me like a bluegrass lick, you know, the doom da doom da doom da.
Yeah.
And I was just like, amazing. And from that moment, I was just like, I need to find out more about bluegrass. And so my parents were like, okay, well, you know, there's Bill Monroe, and we had a copy of the Deliverance soundtrack with all the banjos. And obviously this is way before the internet, so it was a bit harder to get into things. You know, there is a bluegrass scene here in Australia, but it wasn't like I grew up in Tennessee. So you had to really dig for things. But so that was essentially it. But I think that when I started I took to the guitar like relatively well. I think my parents could tell by the time I was, I don't know, maybe like 11 or 12 that I had like a natural aptitude for it. Mm-hmm. And in Sydney, there is quite a well-known performing arts high school, like the Fame High School in New York, called Newtown High School of the Performing Arts. And my parents said, look, you know, you should audition for that. And I auditioned and I got in. And it's when I got in that I think my parents could sort of see another shift in terms of like, I think it's a very common thing amongst teenage males, particularly when they're just like, guitar, you know, I'll have kids come into a lesson and they'll just like rock up with a Metallica record and they're just like, have you ever heard this? And I was like, welcome to the club, bud. You've caught the bug now, you know.
There's no turning back.
Exactly. And I think that they could also see that it was highly likely that I would probably want to go on and do tertiary study, you know, go to university and do music. Mm-hmm. And they had enough sort of knowledge, having done it themselves, thinking like, well, if you play guitar, there are either private colleges that teach like popular music stuff, But if you want to get a job working potentially in a university or even a school, you really need to study classical music. And that's what they had studied. And so then they said, you need to learn classical guitar. And so when I was in, I would have been year 6, I think it was, like the last year of elementary school here, I started classical guitar lessons. And that started a lifelong love affair with classical music. I think before that, I just associated it with my parents' music. You know, they tried, like we would go to the opera house quite frequently and watch the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, but I just wasn't that into it at the time. And that helped me, learning the classical guitar, helped me learn to read. And then obviously, as I went through my teenage years, I got very seriously into classical guitar playing, jazz, and blues, and all the different genres. I just love the guitar. I just would hear a genre, I'm like, I want to be able to do that. And would just work really hard. And it was kind of, I think, a blessing being a teenager pre, the internet and YouTube. As wonderful as YouTube is for like an educational resource with like just lessons and licks, it meant that I had no distraction. Like, what were you going to do? Like rent a video and then rewind it and return it and then play guitar or ride your bike outside. Like that was it. And I just played my guitar a lot. Then from that I went to university at the Sydney Conservatorium where my parents went. And I studied classical guitar. I did a double major in classical guitar and jazz guitar.
Oh, wow.
And that sort of led to another opening in terms of, I guess, musical possibilities. Because when I was in first year, there was a composer, a European composer called Georges Lenz. And Georges is quite a well-known contemporary composer in the Northern Hemisphere. He's known in Australia, but particularly in that sort of German, French school, he's quite respected. He's what's known as a complexist. And he was looking for someone to write an electric guitar piece for. And my teacher at the time knew that I could read and knew that I played rock guitar, because a lot of the classical guitarists at the time could read, but if you gave him an electric guitar, it sounded pretty wussy, not really like a rock guitar player. And so that put me in touch with George, and it led to this wonderful like friendship and collaboration where he ended up writing a quite a large piece. I think it's 60-minute unaccompanied guitar work.
Wow.
Which I then premiered in Europe, and it kind of put me on the map in a very niche world of being this specialist in contemporary classical music. So while I had that other aspect of things that I was really working on, which is like blues, jazz, country, I just got, I said yes to a phone call and ended up in this other world where I was playing with like symphony orchestras that I'd never planned on doing. And that's been kind of a really wonderful, it's really high pressure, and they're not the most relaxing gigs you'll ever do. But it's been amazing just working with orchestras and learning how to follow a conductor. So that was something that I'd never, ever practiced or planned for. And I just, said yes to an opportunity. And I guess, that's sort of the somewhat concise backstory for my guitar playing.
Well, as you're talking, Braden, you must be thinking the same thing. You covered about almost every topic we've touched on. Okay. I was going to ask him that. I was going to ask him that. And it was what's awesome. The most awesome moment of all of this is, for me, my favorite player is Eddie Van Halen. But you're up there. You're up there, Zane. You're in the top 5 for sure now. But anyways, and of course, right off the top, you mentioned. I said I can't believe Zane Banks is mentioning Eddie Van Halen. This is the coolest moment.
I love him. I remember being in the 7th grade, and I knew what Eruption was because I had Guitar Player magazines. I had a transcription of it. I knew what it looked like. It was just this black page, and I was like, even though I'd never heard it, I was like, one day I'm going to play you. And I went to a friend's house, and it was when Napster had just come out, and he downloaded a copy of it, and we sat down, and I listened to it, and I was just like, after, a minute and 20 seconds, or however long it is, I was just picking up bits of brain matter off the wall. It blew my mind.
Well,
and I remember thinking,
it still does. Sorry. And it does this, and it still does. I don't know if it does for you guys. Still put it on and just go, what the? It's amazing how it's such an important moment in sort of the evolution of the guitar. And it's funny, Zane, because I would have, by watching you play and just being such a well versatile master of the guitar, I would have never guessed that you were into it. I mean, not that I'm not saying that. It just seemed to me I don't know, for some strange reason I didn't think you went through a Van Halen phase. But,
that was the eighth grade, mate.
Yeah,
that's all I listened to. I had every record. I learned all the solos. I used to go to secondhand bookshops and collect guitar play magazines from the 80s. And there are a couple of really good ones that I found, even going back to like 79, I found one or two, and there was another one where like Eddie teaches his different techniques, and there was a great one from the early 90s, just after For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge came out, and had all of these great licks from like Pound Cake, and oh man, love Eddie.
That is so cool. Wow, you've even become even cooler to me now. Well, just geez, where do we go? Like again, we talked about so many things. I remember one of the guests that we talked to, two of them, two players that have both played with Stevie Wonder, Roman Johnson and another guy named Morris O'Connor, and they both said exactly what you said. They both said, "Quote," I said, "Well, it comes down to the blues. It always comes down to the blues." And sure enough, as you're describing yourself, you went through your blues phase and your improv phase, but it's very rare that you, at least upon my journey, and I'm sure you feel the same way, Braden, that you find a guy that has, you literally studied both ends of the spectrum. You went right to the classical end, and you went right to the bluegrass. When I first saw you play, I thought you were from, I was watching you play country licks as shredding, and I thought you were from Nashville. I thought you were a Nashville player. When I just went, who is this guy? So it's quite.
I've thought about making the move many times, but it's never quite worked out. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the way the world is now, you
exactly.
Do sessions anywhere now, and but did you ever let me ask you about a different kind of guitar player, because I think you're one of those rare players that would fall into this category. There's if you're from Canada and you take guitar playing remotely seriously, you go through a Lenny Bro phase, and I'm wondering
what a player.
If you did, I mean, I would dare to say that you would fall into that. You're one, not too many players really fall into that. He's the same way. He went from both ends of the spectrum. I mean, that guy could play anything, right? Classical, jazz, bluegrass, and play it monstrously well, right? So,
he was another one of those guys. Yeah, definitely. I'm still going through it.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, I remember there were just so many guitar players that I read about that it was almost impossible to find recordings, let alone footage. But there would be these references to Lenny Bro, and I'd sort of piece together he wasn't alive anymore. And there would always be, it's the same, Joe Pass was another one. There would always be prefaced by genius or virtuoso.
Yes,
and immediately it was I need to check this guy out. Yeah. And I mean, the Lenny Bro of Australia is Tommy Emmanuel. And Tommy, grew up in the country, but is a Sydney boy, essentially. And so everyone that I knew was friends with Tommy. He's just a local, he lives in Nashville now, but he's just a local boy. And so any musician who's been gigging for, I'd say, more than 15 years, they know Tommy or they have Tommy stories. And it was through sort of watching Tommy sort of videos and talking to some of his friends that I got to understand more about Lenny Bro, when they explain the whole harp harmonic thing and the jazz finger style, where he took Chet Atkins and Merle Travis and Jerry Reed and then extended it to Tal Farlow. And I got a Tal Farlow Hot Licks video. And that was the first time I saw footage of Lenny Bro and Tal.
Hot Licks videos.
Yeah. I've got a bunch of them, actually. Yeah, and it was amazing. I seen this guy on a 7-string guitar playing all these piano chord voicings that were really hard to play. Yeah. And then I did get, what did I get? I remember once being in New York City. It's I don't know, it was just after 9/11, and being in downtown at a cool little record store, and I found a record of Buddy Emmons and Lenny Bro. It's called Swinging on a 7-string or something.
Oh yeah, it's a killer.
Which was amazing.
Yeah.
So it's the only record I've ever owned, and now with YouTube, I've been sucked into a number of Lenny Bro vortexes. But he's amazing, and it's such a tragic figure too. Didn't he like freeze to death in Buffalo in a car or?
No, I think what happened. Yeah, we every time we bring up Lenny Bro, this comes up as well. And as far as I know, there's our sort of government mandated, TV, like the BBC, it's the CBC, right? They did a documentary, and he passed away in Los Angeles. They found him in a pool, but it was mysterious. They were never able to sort of get to the bottom of what happened. They think maybe it could have been an ex-wife or something but there was never enough evidence to. They thought it might be foul play, but he's definitely a big part of the Canadian. I had the good fortune of I took lessons. I went to music school in Toronto to a school called Humber College, and a fella named Peter Harris was one of his students, and he actually had one of Lenny's guitars. Lenny gave him one of the guitars, and so it was kind of neat just to be in a room with him and pick his brain. And now he was a kid, taking, because I guess they'd grown up in Winnipeg or Toronto. I can't remember what part of Canada they'd grown up in, but he took lessons off him when he was a kid. Like Lenny was a young adult, and my teacher, so it was kind of neat to be. Yeah. I wish more of it would have rubbed off on me, but I mean, So, geez, Braden, what, you have any questions? I know you've got lots. You've been talking about this interview for a while.
Well, like we were talking about Lenny Bro, and I know you've been influenced, Zane, by someone else, because I've heard it in a lot of your soloing, and he influenced me a lot, and that's Danny Gatton.
Oh yeah.
And he was also influenced by Lenny Bro.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't want to give anything away, but I was listening to one of your solos, and it was literally, it sounded just like Danny, like it just sounded so good. It was unbelievable. I think you just recently posted that on Instagram, and it's just like, wow, you totally studied all the nuances and his playing. It was just like absolutely incredible. So when were you exposed for? Yeah, go ahead.
It was my guitar teacher, Mark, again. Yeah. And there was a period in the mid-90s when he was living above a record store. And my brother and I were both taking lessons. And the way it would work is one would have a lesson for half an hour and the other one would just hang out with the owner of the record store, who was a really cool guy. Mm-hmm. And I remember going in and like saying hi to Mark at the beginning of a lesson. And he said, "Hey, there's a record that's just come in that you should check out." I was like, "What is it?" And he's like, "Just go downstairs and ask Warren if you can put on 88 Elmira Street." I was like, "All right." So I go downstairs. "Hey, Mark said I got to listen to this record." And he put it on, and it started with, Funky Mama. Yeah. And the thing, I like, Danny is one of those guitar players that I keep coming back to. I don't listen to him. Not anymore. I don't listen to him every day. I certainly did for many, many years. Mm-hmm. But I might go 18 months without really listening to a Gatton record, and I go back and it blows me away in the same way it did when I first heard it. There's only, I reckon, a handful of guitar players that they still retain that thing where I'm just like, man, there's some things he's doing. I'm just like, what the hell is he doing? Like, how does he do that?
Yeah. And that's how we feel about you, Zane. But anyway,
it's just smoke and mirrors, man. Seriously,
just hiding those 3 licks. I'm just kidding.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to bring that up later, but we have this. Obviously, we call this the psychology of lickage. So we like to look at this from a psychological point of view. What's going through your head? How are people? What makes the player? All these influences. We have this little theory that we developed from our long drives on the way to gigs. Is the 3 lick theory, that sort of every player, if you analyze every player. Now, in your case, it's a little more complex, but most, sort of the this sort of popular culture guitar players, Stevie Ray Vaughan to Eddie Van Halen to, Eric Clapton and they come down to 3 licks. If you really analyze their playing, you learn every solo and there's sort of 3 major licks they use, and then they tie them all together. Do you do that? I find it more difficult with you to identify that, but do you find that you lean on 3 licks, when you're in a situation and you got to jam or you got to improv? or is it more complex for you? Do you have maybe 30 licks? I don't know.
The way I tend to, because I find the mental approach to improvising endlessly fascinating, and not just to guitar players. I find the way any kind of creative approaches that, even if it's a slam poet, I think is very interesting.
Totally.
For me, when it comes to improvising, it's just as simple as like I see improvising as it's a language.
Yeah.
And it's no different to, say, speaking Spanish or German. And the thing that really appealed to me is I wanted to be completely fluent. So if I moved to Germany, I wouldn't be content eventually, if I was there for a number of years, just having a phrase book. Like, I would want to be able to speak German so fluently that I could read Goethe in German. I could go to a stand-up comedy thing in German. Not that there's probably that many stand-up comedy things in Germany, but, I'd want to go there so I could understand jokes, like subtle things that you have to be totally fluent in the language.
Yeah, for sure.
And I felt that that's really the thing. And I think that part of learning blues or learning rock, and it can be some of its undoing, is that it's quite easy initially to, like, here's your blues scale, you can see it, you become more of a visual improviser, seeing the notes that you can play and that you can't play. And I think that you don't connect so much with your ear, and
that's
while
right.
that's
right.
it's incredibly rewarding, like I see it with kids I've taught as well. Like, you rock up for a lesson, you go home half an hour later and you can play some licks. And if that's all you want to do, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a wonderful thing. But I, after hearing these players we've talked about, became very curious. And also, like, my mind is such that if I am interested in something, I want to take it apart, look at how it works, and then reassemble it so that I understand it. If I was a mechanic, like, I would, have to take an engine out and label every part and look at it, and so that I knew exactly in my mind's eye how an engine works. And so what my approach, I think, has been very much, I think you're right. There is definitely like three, archetypal licks, particularly in blues and rock. And then there are just derivatives of that. I think when it comes to country music, there might be more like 5 or 6 sort of major types of licks.
For sure.
And when it comes to jazz, I think there might be more like, say, 20. But if you listen to everything that Joe Pass ever recorded, or everything that Charlie Parker recorded, you will hear the same licks over and over and over again. He just knows how to play them in every position, in every key, at every tempo. But there are only a number of major ideas. There's just that fluency. And it's the same with English. Like, if you were to read a transcript of what we've said so far, which is improvised, there's no script. The amount of times you would see similar phrases or conjunctions and that, you go, oh, wow, I said like the word and 562 times. That's pretty common. And I think it's just having that fluency, because like, improvising really is a misleading term. Like, essentially all we're doing is just assembling in a new way pre-learnt material. It's like instant recall of pre-learnt material.
Exactly.
Wow.
For sure.
And I think for me, like, oh, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
I think I have been in that situation where I have had just 3 licks, particularly, if I've been getting into a genre and, before I have that sort of fluency. And I've never liked the feeling that I'm reliant on just 3 licks. Like, I remember, being, in my early teens, playing some country music with people, and I had like, a couple of cool licks that were impressive, but by the time you get your like 7th or 8th solo in the night, like, at least to me, I was aware that I was using the same material, and I felt really embarrassed. And I was like, well, I gotta do something about this. I just have to come up with every single different variation. And so the way I would practice things, particularly jazz and country, I see blues and rock are almost like cousins. The way the scales and the rhythms that you get in that music and the phrasing, they're very similar. Jazz and country music are more line-based, and they follow the harmony of the song. So in that sense, they're kind of similar, and jazz is just a slightly more complex version of it. But what I would do is I would set myself the task of, I would transcribe a bunch of solos, learn these licks in different keys. But before I got too attached to them and they became like default licks, like a crutch or something that I was resting on too much, I would sit at home and I would put on a backing track, say for an A major chord, or it might be an E flat half diminished, whatever the chord is. And I'd put it on for like 30 minutes at a slow tempo. And I would force myself to play straight eighth note lines where I wasn't able to repeat a lick until I'd played at least 3 or 4 other licks. So I couldn't just keep generating a lick. And it was through just forcing myself to play and singing what I was playing that you just develop fluency.
Wow.
And it takes time and it's hard. There's a video I put up on YouTube about how to construct a country solo. I did 3 of them. And the third video, I just do A major licks for about 3 minutes and I talk while I'm playing and I'm just saying like, this is what I'm doing. And there's no break.
I've seen that one. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's basically just what it is. And I was trying to give people an insight into, because I'd watched your videos and I was like, okay, well, the psychology, I find it really interesting. And I thought, well, I'm just talk through in real time and try and let people know ahead of the target note. Oh, now I'm going to the third. There's a third. Now I'm thinking of going to the fifth. Bang. Yeah. So I have like these waypoints and then it's like fill in the gaps. And so that's kind of how I approach improvising. But yeah, there are still like essentially different, types of licks that everything is derived from.
Well, I think you touched on a couple of things while you're talking about this. And hey, by the way, Braden, this is a great way to get a free lesson out of Zane, isn't it?
No, I was just thinking that.
I was thinking that as they're talking. Well, man, this is so valuable. But I think what happens, there's also an element of performance too, right? So. It's one thing I remember, like just like you, I used to collect all the guitar magazine, Guitar World, and all this stuff. And I remember reading an article of all people, the 2 guitar players from Judas Priest, KK Downing and Glenn Tipton. I can't remember the other guy. But anyways, and one of them. So when you play live, do you play at your maximum capacity? And this really always struck with me. They said, no, we don't even come close to playing 50%. And I think that's where the 3-lick theory comes into play, right? It's one thing to be able to sit in a nice, comfortable studio or your office and you're just playing whatever you can. Your guitar is comfortably on your lap and all that sort of thing. It's another thing to be in the thick of it. You're distracted by the audience and what's going on, and your amp not being the right tone, and one of your cables is cutting out. You get all these things. It's very uncomfortable. And so I know I do this. I tend to lean on my 3 licks very hard when it comes to that time. You're just like, I can't get into the zone and whatever. So I'm just going to lean on those and lean on, go to that 50% mark instead of going all the way to 100. And then you still come across as I think that's sort of a professional approach. At least that's how most pros approach it. But I was going to say, I think part of the reason why guitar players like Braden and I search out guys like you is because you get so tired of just listening to the, as much as I love Eddie and he's still fresh to me, I can still tell everything that's going on now. I can hear it. I can see it. When you play, I notice I find that stimulating because I can't really see it. I'm going, Jesus, what, wait. And I got to slow down, stop the video. And what was he thinking there? I think it shows. It shows that you're not leaning on your 3 licks. You're all, I can tell you're following the chords and that's your education and your sort of jazz background or whatever. But so I don't even know if there's a question there. It was an observation more than anything. But
I think that, that is, it's true when you think about when you listen to Eddie Van Halen, I still get a lot of pleasure from listening to Van Halen and Slash and all of these guys. Yeah. And I think of it, it's like flavors. I still love the really delicious, salty flavor of fried chicken. I love it. I don't want to have it every meal, but when you have good fried chicken, it's incredibly rewarding. Yeah. And at the same time, I love my family.
We just found the name of the podcast. But Zane Banks. I love fried chicken.
That's why I play Telecaster.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I love Scotch whiskey. My grandmother's from Scotland, and that whole side of the family still live in Scotland. And so when you have some of those, particularly the peatier whiskeys, they're very complex, bold, strong flavors that aren't for everybody. And I find that my taste in music is similar to that sometimes I want to listen to just straight down meat and potatoes rock and roll, which for me, I reckon the greatest meat and potatoes rock and roll band are the band that grew up literally about a kilometer from my house, and that's AC/DC.
Oh, I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Like they went to my, the local high school and all that stuff, and I can listen to what they're playing, and it's just like GADC.
Talk about dialing
so
in
good.
the theory.
Yeah, totally.
Mastering
but
it.
It's mastering. Like his tone's perfect, his rhythm, so everything about it. But then afterwards, I might want to listen to, say, Danny Gatton, and listening to Danny Gatton is, I guess, almost like having, Indian or Turkish food, like something that's perhaps you didn't grow up with, at least not in a Western culture. I go, whoa, what is that? Turmeric, or is it paprika? What are these different things? And I just was like, I'm a curious guy, and so Danny and Lenny Bro were kind of gateway dudes for like more, I guess, purist players. Like I would hear them, and then you would end up going to Wes or Joe Pass, and even more straight ahead guys in all the different sort of genres, and going, oh, okay, like where's the source of the river? And,
Yes. I think we might have lost some of our audience when it comes to some of the more non-music. It's funny. I sometimes get messages from just fans of our band that aren't musicians, and this is one of those moments where they'll, I really like it. I find it entertaining. You sometimes lose me when you guys start talking about the musical stuff, but I think that was one of those moments where I think Braden and I totally got it, but I think a lot of the others. I mean, I could go on all night. I've been like I said, this is one we've been kind of waiting for a while, and because I'm just fascinated about you're an extremely disciplined player, and I think those kind of players are very rare. I mean, you see them; they're the top guys in Nashville, or the guys in New York, or the guys in LA, So in Australia, is there like a sort of thriving studio scene? Do you find yourself playing on a lot of different people's songs? Well, I mean, before the pandemic.
No, the scene in Sydney, I guess, like the east coast of Australia, we've got Sydney, and then about like 800 miles south is Melbourne. And they both have very healthy scenes. Melbourne has a very good live music scene, so there's lots of bars, and their state government is quite relaxed about getting a license to have live music. So you could go down there, and like every cafe will have a songwriter playing, and every pub will have a band. In Sydney, it became a bit hard to get licenses throughout the 90s, and so the scene suffered a little bit then, but it's quite good now. And so, I mean, before I became a father, I used to gig all the time. I'd be out, 5 nights a week doing, sideman stuff, playing in my own, like I play in a band called the Cruisin' Juices. I play with my brother a lot. My brother's a pedal steel player, so we would do stuff as the Banks Brothers. And I played banjo in a band called the Morrisons. So between those three things, and then getting calls for different, gigs, I would be out a lot. And there would be sort of sessions. I've never really had to build up like a home studio thing, because there are a bunch of studios near where I live, and I would just go in and do stuff. And it is a good place. Like I think that Sydney it's one of those major cities that if you're, in anywhere leaning towards, say, the east coast of Australia, it's like if you lived anywhere east of the Mississippi River, then you'd probably end up in either Nashville or New York. Like that's where the scenes are for certain things. And same thing, you'd end up in LA and Sydney is just that kind of place where if you're into music and you're serious, you'll get people from New Zealand will just come over here, and people from inland Australia, or even from the West Coast. Like there's not really a scene over in like Perth and Western Australia. It's just too small and too isolated. So it is a pretty good place. The thing that you just find is, as a country, we're quite isolated and far away, so it becomes expensive. You guys are talking about how you sometimes play in America. For me, like I've gone over to the US and I've played over there, but I've never brought a band from Australia over because it's just so expensive. Once you get visas and flights, it's like $20,000 before you can even start making, potentially making a profit,
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. We have the good fortune of just driving 2 hours and we cross the border, and then off we go. We play on the West Coast and things like that. So
Yeah.
but Australia has always been one place I've wanted to go. Just for I hear quite spots in the world. Yeah.
Also, that it is quite rural and has, a lot of like just.
Yeah.
I would with the US market and then niche markets like Japan and Korea.
Yeah.
Canada and Australia are probably the second biggest markets that actually have like farmers that are into that American style country music as opposed to like English farmers that are, you don't really associate with country music.
For sure.
So we have a number of huge festivals, and every year, guys like Alan Jackson and, Tim McGraw, like big names, will come out to Australia and play.
Wow.
It's pretty good.
Well, I was thinking of we're going to have an episode called Dads, because we interviewed Braden's dad plays guitar, my stepdad played guitar, and we kind of talk about this with all our guests. I mean, obviously you said your parents were teachers, and is it basically the family business for you? Did you find that like no matter what you would have ended up being a musician simply because the environment that you grew up in?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there was never any pressure. So if I wanted to be an economist, my parents would have been like, yeah, sure. Like they were very supportive.
Yeah.
But I think that like the seeds were just sown. I think that I had the temperament and the interest that I was just, as soon as I saw it, like when I was saying with those Eddie Van Halen film clips, it's never, ever gone away. Like the fire is still there, 30, 34 years later. And then if you're like that and you grow up in an environment where there are guitars and my parents played gigs and their friends were musicians, it's just like you kind of don't really have a choice. Your fate's sort of sealed.
Yeah.
So I was very fortunate in the sense that like I've got a lot of friends now who have come from, say, non-musical families and have said like, oh, it was so hard for me to get to where I was. I had to, really ask for guitar lessons, and then no one could help if, they didn't understand something, that I had to move to the city. Like I was very fortunate that I grew up in the city in a musical community with musicians.
Yeah.
But I think that probably subconsciously, like my brother's a professional. I've never, ever derived any income that isn't music related. I never had a part-time job as a teenager. It was just playing gigs or teaching.
Wow. That's cool.
So
that's really, really cool.
Yeah, I think that like there's definitely an element. What I'm finding interesting now is watching my daughter respond to music. She just, as soon as she hears it, she's into it. I play a lot of music at home. She's been to more gigs and festivals than any small child that like I know of.
Yeah.
And will she, over time sort of start to go down that route? Again, I don't want to, like, it's not an easy life being a musician, as you guys know.
No, yeah. I don't encourage it with my kids. I don't encourage it at all.
Yeah.
I don't discourage it, because of course if you discourage something too much, they'll end up doing that too. So you got to be careful.
Exactly.
But no, I don't. You're right. It's a very it's funny. I think when I think about the future for my kids, I almost I want to protect them from not being in it, It's like, maybe it's, especially being in an original band and all the ups and downs we've gone through. But at the same time, I obviously would totally understand it. I think in your case, I think she's got, she's going to grow up and it's going to be the family business. If I had to guess.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah. Like now when I retrospectively look back on it, I think that's what my parents were doing when they made suggestions about, do you want to learn classical guitar? I think they could see that so many of their friends hadn't studied. And when the industry kind of changed and was very big on like, oh, where's your certificate? Where's your diploma? It doesn't matter if you've, spent 20 years touring with Stevie Wonder. Like, I need a certificate for you to teach at this school. I think they could see that, like, rather than saying, no, don't do this, or, of course, just go for it. They sort of very gently made suggestions like, oh, you should do this. And then I went to university, and I went to Sydney Conservatorium is essentially the music department of Sydney University, which is like the most respected university, I guess, in the Southern Hemisphere. Yeah. So then that happened, and I got a degree there. And I think they could see that I was becoming quite involved in that contemporary music scene, particularly when I was at university. And there weren't necessarily any jobs that were looming. And so I don't know if Canada has a similar thing, but in Australia, what happens is if you do your undergrad degree, you can do a thing called an honours year, which is essentially like it's an extra year of study for your undergrad. And you can do like a small level research project where you can pick a topic. And if you get in the top bracket, what's called like first class division 1, you can then bypass doing a master's degree and go straight on to doing doctorate of philosophy, PhD. And so I was able to get first class division 1. And at the age of 21, I started a PhD. And in Australia, the way that works is if you're an Australian resident, there are no fees and you get paid to do it. So I was getting paid $30,000 tax-free by the government to do a PhD on the electric guitar.
I think Braden's moving to Australia.
Yeah.
Don't give me any ideas.
And so my parents were really keen on that because it meant that at least there was that opportunity, like if things became really dire from performing or even just teaching private lessons, that there was the academic route that I could go down, potentially work at a university.
Do you foresee that? That was going to be one of my questions because I was aware that you were a doctor. I was like, it was certainly not medicine. I'm going to guess it. It's
I've always been nervous that if I get on a flight, because it says on an airplane. See, like, there's Dr. Banks.
Okay.
That
Can
someone
you
would
sing
be
me
like,
a middle C? Can you sing me?
Like someone's having a heart attack or delivering a baby, and I have to go like, look, I could sing to you, but I'm not a cardiologist.
Oh my God, that's funny. But do you? I mean, that is as far I don't know. Oh, I didn't want that to end. Unfortunately, we have to wait till next week to hear the whole thing.
Yeah.
Is that just the guitar nerd in me, or other people fascinated with this?
Well, I think he had a lot of good points there. But I think we're going to talk about it next episode. We're going to go through and psychoanalyze the whole thing, and try and come to the best conclusions that we can about what he talked about and what both you and I learned from it, and what we think the listeners listened from it or heard from it.
For sure. So be sure to stick around. Come back next week for part 2, and then listen all the way to the end because we're going to psychoanalyze at the end.
Exactly.
not that we're qualified to, but we're going to
we're no doctors at all.
Dr. Zane's exactly. Dr. Zane's psychology of lickage.
Hi, this is Shawn Meehan.
This is Braden Williams,
and you're listening to
The Psychology
of Lickage.